A 12-year-old girl was selling her artwork to pay for chemo, struggling to make even a few dollars, until Barron Trump walked by and did something no one expected. The air in Rittenhouse Square, Philadelphia, carried the usual sounds of the evening: hurried footsteps, car horns, the distant murmur of conversations blending into the rhythm of the city. The park, surrounded by historic brownstones and towering offices, had always been a place where artists and street performers set up, hoping to catch the eye of passing locals. But Brielle shouldn't have been there. At 12 years old, she should have been at home, watching a show or doing schoolwork. Instead, she sat behind a small foldable table, carefully arranging a row of watercolor paintings beneath the glow of a street lamp. A flimsy cardboard sign next to her read, "Original artwork. Help fund my treatment." People glanced at it as they walked by. Some slowed down, their gazes flicking toward the delicate landscapes and portraits she had poured her soul into. Others barely noticed. Brielle clenched her fingers together in her lap, trying to ignore the dull ache in her chest, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything. She had grown up painting, filling her bedroom walls with bursts of color, dreamy cityscapes, and soft watercolors of places she had never been. It had always been her escape. But now, it was survival. Leukemia didn't care about talent. It didn't care about dreams, about kids who had lives ahead of them. It was ruthless, and it was expensive. Her mother, Danielle, had done everything she could. Loans, charity programs, crowdfunding, but it wasn't enough. The next round of chemo would cost over $3,000, and time was running out. So Brielle made a decision. She snuck out with a stack of her best paintings, a small foldable table, and a chair that wobbled slightly. Her mother would be furious if she found out, but Brielle couldn't sit at home watching her mom lose sleep over numbers that never added up. For the first half hour, nothing. People admired the artwork, even smiled, but their hands stayed in their pockets. A few kind words, a few nods, and they kept walking. Then, finally, someone stopped. An older woman, dressed in a thick wool coat, picked up a painting, a sunrise breaking through a layer of dark clouds. "These are lovely," she said, running a gloved finger over the edge of the paper. Brielle held her breath. The woman hesitated, then set the painting down. "Good luck, sweetheart." And just like that, she was gone. Brielle swallowed hard, forcing herself not to feel disappointed. Compliments didn't pay hospital bills. She glanced down at her hands, exhaling slowly, before hearing the sudden clatter of a skateboard. A boy, maybe 16, had stopped in front of her table, his hoodie loose over his frame. He looked at the paintings for a moment, then pulled a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket. "This one's cool," he said, pointing at a skyline at night. Brielle took the money and handed him the painting. It wasn't much, but it was something. The boy gave her a quick nod and skated off, disappearing into the crowd. One sale, one step closer. But as the sky darkened and the air turned colder, the trickle of interest faded. People were in too much of a rush to stop. Brielle adjusted the paintings, telling herself she'd stay for one more hour. And then she saw him, a tall figure flanked by 2 security guards walking slowly through the square. He wasn't in a hurry, his gaze shifting across the vendors and street musicians. Brielle didn't recognize him at first. But then he stopped, right in front of her table. Her pulse quickened as the realization hit her. Barron Trump. He stood there studying the paintings with quiet focus, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he picked up the sunrise painting, and what he did next left Brielle completely stunned. Brielle barely had time to process what was happening. Barron Trump, the Barron Trump, was holding one of her paintings, his expression unreadable as he studied it. The security guard stood a few feet back, watchful but relaxed, as if this was just another stop on his evening walk. Brielle's fingers tightened in her lap. She had met plenty of people tonight who admired her work, but walked away when it came time to pay. She braced herself for the same outcome. "This is yours?" Barron asked, his voice calm but deeper than she expected. She nodded. "Yeah." His eyes flickered from the artwork to her face. "You're really talented." "Thanks," she said, shifting in her chair. Compliments were nice, but they wouldn't cover her chemo. Barron's gaze dropped to the small cardboard sign propped next to her table. He took a long moment reading it, his jaw tightening slightly. When he looked back up, something in his expression had changed. "How much?" he asked. Brielle hesitated. $25? The moment stretched. Barron didn't react, didn't blink. Then slowly he reached into the pocket of his coat. But instead of a wallet, he pulled out a thick, folded stack of cash. Brielle's breath caught. She watched as he calmly counted out $1,000, 10 crisp $100 bills, before setting them down on the table beside the painting. She stared, then looked up at him, her mouth slightly open. I think you made a mistake." Barron shook his head. "No mistake." Her heart pounded in her chest. "You're paying $1,000? For one painting?" His expression softened, but his voice was firm. "No. I'm giving you $1,000 because I can. Because you need it." Brielle swallowed hard. She couldn't tell if the tightness in her throat was from shock or something else entirely. This wasn't how the world worked. People didn't just drop that kind of money on a stranger. Especially not her. She hesitated, staring at the cash like it might disappear if she reached for it too fast. "But—" Barron raised a hand slightly, stopping her. "I know what you're thinking. You don't have to explain." His voice was steady, certain. "Just take it." Brielle's fingers twitched. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was too much, too generous, too unbelievable. People had walked past her stand all evening, offering sympathetic glances, murmuring good luck before moving on. But here was someone who had actually stopped, who had actually done something. A gust of wind rushed through the square, rustling the edges of her paintings. The weight of the cash felt surreal in her hands. She looked back up at him, still trying to wrap her mind around it. I don't know what to say." Barron gave her a small nod, his gaze steady. "Then don't say anything." And just like that, he turned to leave. But Brielle couldn't let him walk away. Not yet. Brielle's heart pounded as she gripped the stack of cash in her hands. $1,000. More than she had made in months of selling her art. More than she had ever expected in one night. But something about it didn't sit right. Not that she didn't need the money, she did desperately. But the way Barron had given it without hesitation left her feeling unsettled. Like there was more to this moment than she understood. As Barron turned to leave, something inside her snapped. "Wait!" Her own voice startled her. The security guard shifted slightly, their attention flickering toward her, but Barron stopped. He glanced back, one eyebrow raised. Brielle swallowed hard. She didn't know what she was about to say, only that she couldn't just let this happen without understanding why. "I don't get it," she admitted, gripping the edges of her coat to keep her hands from shaking. "Why me? Why this?" Barron studied her for a moment, then took a step closer, his hands slipping into his coat pockets. "I've seen people like you before," he said simply. She frowned. "Like me?" He nodded. "Fighters. People who don't wait for someone to come save them. You're out here, selling your own work, doing whatever it takes to survive." His gaze flickered to the paintings. "You could have given up, but you didn't." Brielle felt her throat tighten. She had spent so much time feeling invisible. In hospital waiting rooms, in financial offices where her mother begged for more time, in school hallways where kids whispered behind her back. But he had noticed her. She looked down at the cash again, still struggling to process it. It feels too easy." Barron let out a small laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Trust me, nothing about life is easy." His expression turned serious. "Money doesn't fix everything, but I know it can give people time. And sometimes time is the difference between winning and losing." Brielle knew that better than anyone. Time was what her doctors kept warning her about. Time was what her mother never seemed to have enough of between work and hospital visits. Time was what she needed to keep fighting. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let her emotions take over. Instead, she exhaled and squared her shoulders. "Then let me give you something back," she said, reaching for the painting Barron had been holding. "You don't have to take it, but it's yours, if you want it." Barron hesitated for just a second, then took the painting carefully as if it meant something. He ran a thumb along the edges, the corners slightly bent from being handled all day. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Brielle shrugged. "It's a sunrise. New day, new start." Barron's lips curved slightly, but his eyes held something deeper, understanding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." A moment of silence passed between them, but it wasn't awkward. If anything, it felt like the kind of pause where nothing needed to be said. Barron nodded at her one last time. "Take care of yourself, Brielle." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the evening crowd. But Brielle had no idea that this was only the beginning. Brielle sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where Barron had stood just moments ago. The stack of bills still felt too heavy in her hands, like it belonged to someone else. $1,000. She had spent the past 2 weeks barely scraping together 100, and now, in a single moment, everything had changed. But not just because of the money. It was the way he had spoken to her, like she wasn't just a kid with an illness, like she was worth something more than pity. The cold wind reminded her that she still had work to do. She carefully folded the bills and slipped them into her jacket pocket, then turned her attention back to the paintings. There was still time to sell a few more, but something was different now. People were stopping. At first it was just one woman, mid-30s, dark hair, a business suit that probably cost more than Brielle's entire wardrobe. She picked up one of the smaller paintings, her eyes flickering toward Brielle's sign. "You're really selling these for your treatment?" the woman asked, tilting her head slightly. Brielle hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah." The woman studied her for a long moment, then pulled out a $50 bill. "I'll take this one." Brielle blinked. "It's only $15. "Consider the rest a donation," the woman said with a small smile. Before Brielle could even process that, another person stopped. Then another. A man in a heavy coat, holding a coffee, bought 2 paintings. "One for me, one for my daughter," he explained. He handed her a $100 bill and waved away her attempt to give him change. Then came a young couple, their arms linked as they browsed the artwork. The woman gasped at one of the sunset pieces. "This is stunning." The man glanced at Brielle. "We'll take it." And, he exchanged a quick look with his girlfriend before reaching for his wallet. "Here. $200. Brielle's head spun. This wasn't normal. It wasn't just luck. Something had shifted. A group of college students stopped next. They took pictures of her setup, posted about it on social media, and within minutes, more people started coming. Someone whispered, "Did you hear? Barron Trump was just here. He gave her $1,000. It spread like wildfire. People who would have normally walked past without a second glance now stopped, eager to support her. It was as if Barron's single act of kindness had flipped a switch in the city's heart. The stack of bills in her jacket grew thicker. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. But she had no idea how much bigger this was about to get. Brielle's small art stand, which had barely drawn a glance an hour ago, now had a crowd. People weren't just stopping to buy her paintings. They were asking questions, taking pictures, sharing her story online. Some even recorded short videos, narrating how a young girl was selling artwork to afford chemotherapy, and how Barron Trump himself had stepped in to help. She overheard snippets of conversations. "Did you see? He just handed her $1,000. It's all over Twitter already. That kid's got guts." Brielle could barely keep up. She was selling paintings faster than she could organize them. The cash in her coat pocket had nearly tripled, and it didn't stop there. Then, a woman in her 40s, dressed professionally, phone in hand, approached with an urgency Brielle wasn't expecting. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" the woman asked. Brielle hesitated, clutching the edges of the table. "Brielle." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Melissa. I work with 6ABC News. We'd love to share your story. Would that be okay?" A news station? Brielle felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to attention, not like this. Not the kind that made people gather, whisper, point. But something inside her whispered, "Say yes." Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. Maybe this was about something bigger. She nodded. "Yeah, that's okay." Melissa beamed. "Great. We'll run a quick segment on the local news tonight. But this could go national, sweetheart. You're inspiring a lot of people. Brielle could only nod, her mind racing. National? As in the whole country? Her hands felt clammy. Her entire life she had been just another kid trying to get through the next hospital visit, the next test, the next round of treatment. She had never been the kind of person people paid attention to. Now they were watching, and they weren't looking away. She had no idea how much this was about to change everything. Brielle barely had time to process what was happening. One moment she was just a kid sitting behind a makeshift table, hoping to sell a few paintings. The next, her face was all over the internet. The 6 ABC News segment aired later that night, and within hours it was spreading across social media. The headline read, "12-year-old girl sells artwork for chemo. You won't believe who helped her." By morning, her story had been shared thousands of times. Celebrities, influencers, even complete strangers were posting about her, calling her strength inspiring. People from all over the country were asking how they could help. Her mother, Danielle, had woken up to hundreds of missed calls. At first she panicked, thinking something had gone wrong at the hospital, but when she checked her phone, she found messages from news reporters, charity organizations, and even a few anonymous donors wanting to pay off Brielle's medical bills entirely. Danielle had been furious at first when she found out Brielle had gone out alone, but that anger quickly faded into something else, something much closer to shock and relief. By the end of the week, Brielle's small fundraiser had turned into something far bigger than she had ever imagined. A GoFundMe page, set up by a kind stranger, had already passed $200,000. People who had never met her, never seen her paintings in person, were donating simply because they believed she deserved a chance to fight. And it all started because one person stopped. One person saw her. One person believed she was worth helping. Brielle sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through message after message, each one filled with words of encouragement, prayers, and promises from people who wanted to help. She still couldn't fully believe it. Her mother sat across from her holding her phone in shaky hands. "Brielle," she whispered, eyes glistening with tears. "You're going to get your treatment, all of it. We don't have to worry anymore." The words settled over her like a warm blanket, but they didn't fully sink in. She had spent so long fighting to stay afloat, never imagining what it would feel like to finally breathe. She swallowed hard, staring at the screen. Then, a new notification popped up. An email. The sender? Barron Trump. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open. "Brielle, I saw what happened. I'm glad people stepped up for you. You deserve this and more. Keep painting, keep fighting, and if you ever need anything, you know how to reach me. Barron." Brielle exhaled slowly, her throat tight. She had started this journey alone, but she wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in a long time, she believed, really believed, that she was going to be okay. Brielle sat at the kitchen table, her fingers still hovering over the email. The words on the screen felt unreal, yet they carried the weight of everything that had happened over the past few days. She had started this with nothing, just a table, a handful of paintings, and a desperate hope that someone might stop long enough to help. Now she had enough money to cover every treatment, enough to ensure her mother didn't have to spend another sleepless night wondering how they would keep up with hospital bills, enough to fight without fear. But the money wasn't the part that mattered most. She had spent years feeling invisible, just another patient in a waiting room, another kid fighting a battle too big for her. Yet in the span of one evening, everything had changed. Not because people pitied her, but because someone had seen her. Someone had believed she was worth more than a passing glance. And that one moment, Barron stopping at her stand, choosing to help instead of walking away, had reminded the world what kindness looked like. Her mother sat across from her, watching her closely. "How are you feeling?" Brielle didn't know how to put it into words. For so long she had assumed that help wouldn't come unless she asked for it, unless she begged, unless she made people see how badly she needed it. But real kindness didn't work that way. It didn't wait to be noticed. It didn't demand attention. It just happened. A few days ago she had been sitting in the cold, feeling like she was running out of time. Now she was reading an email from someone who had changed her entire life with one choice. She looked at her mother and smiled, something lighter settling in her chest. I think I finally believe we're going to be okay." Danielle's lips trembled and she reached across the table, gripping Brielle's hands. "We are." Brielle glanced at the stack of paintings still left on the table. People had called her strong, brave, resilient, but she wasn't any of those things because of her illness. She was those things because she had refused to let the world make her small. She had put her art out there, even when it felt impossible. She had trusted that somewhere, somehow, someone would care. And they had. Barron's email still glowed on the screen, but Brielle no longer needed to reread it. She understood the lesson now. It wasn't about how much you had. It wasn't about how much you gave. It was about choosing to see people when no one else does. And one day, she knew she'd do the same for someone else. Because kindness doesn't stop. It moves forward. And that's how the world changes. If this story moved you, remember, kindness is free, but it has the power to change lives. Take a moment today to help someone, whether it's a stranger in need, a friend struggling, or simply by sharing this message. And if you want to see more inspiring stories, make sure to subscribe